So my background in theatre is essentially non-existent, but one of my best friends, her parents, they've worked in the theatre industry longer than I've been alive. So anytime I would have gone into her house, there would always been talks of certain performances, how they were being performed, always talk about plays, that kind of stuff. So I've always been kind of around that industry in that sense. In terms of my favourite artistic experience, it did take place in the theatre. That same friend brought me to the Gate Theatre in Dublin, I'd say 3 years ago. They were putting on an immersive adaptation of F. Scott Fitzgerald's The Great Gatsby, where all the seats were taken out of the auditorium, and the auditorium was turned into the ballroom of Gatsby's mansion. So when you went in, you had all of the cast in character mingling with the audience. Like there was a bar there, you could go and have a drink with them and chat away. And then the play itself then proceeded. But it was a case where you had upwards of nearly 100 people in this ballroom, all learning how to do the Charleston with the cast. That was very cool, very, very immersive.
Besides this particular project, I'm trying to keep up with my playwriting and contributing to the overall atmosphere of the Theater, Dance, and Performance Department at Indiana University of Pennsylvania as best I can, as well as meeting fairly regularly with some old college friends to get together to do play readings. We've done some Shakespeare, we've done some Ibsen, and we've caught up a little bit, and that's been a positive experience. So there are ways of making the artistic stuff happen during these very difficult times, as you're all aware. As a faculty member at IUP is also very challenging, because we're missing a lot of the face-to-face aspect of the teaching, and a lot of what we do in performance and performance studies is very hands-on. Nevertheless, it's been a different way. It's been a different way to kind of share and reveal our mutual humanity and our mutual struggle. I think the students get to see that, especially when I'm teaching from here in my room, and they're seeing all the stuff in the background that's not cleaned up, and the kids are running around and the cats running around. They get a glimpse of my humanity too, I suppose, and it's one of the ways we can turn some of what we're doing into something of an advantage. We really are all in the same boat, and trying to help each other not fall overboard, I guess.
My favourite Halloween tradition, it's something as a child that I loved and hated at the same time, probably because it was so scary for me. So my granddad used to come up every Halloween and he would tell ghost stories. Now my granddad's really old school Ireland, and he's this big man, big booming voice, but when he told stories like that, he'd bring his voice down real quiet. So he'd come up, and there'd be the initial kind of chit chat, how are you, how's school, blah blah blah, and then he'd say, okay, turn the lights off, we'll light some candles, and he'd start telling these stories. And as I said, he'd bring his voice down real low, real quiet, and the stories were real drawn out, but in a good sense, because you were kind of hooked on every word that he said. So he'd tell a few stories and go home then, and then it'd be time for me to go to bed, and I would bawl the house down because I was terrified. He still comes up every year, It still tells his stories, and they're stories I've heard dozens of times, but I still love them because he just has a voice that's made for ghost stories.
Trick-or-treating, I think, is still way up there. Taking the kids every Halloween to do that is a lot of fun. The Great Pumpkin, Charlie Brown, is also must-see viewing. I understand it's a little bit more complicated this year since it's not on regular TV, but I think there are ways to see it. And yeah, it's definitely a fun holiday and a fun month leading up to it, and I always look forward to it.
Whispers in the dark.
You think being in a room poring over unsolved murders, war declarations, assassinations, kidnappings would be exciting, but my God, these documents are dull. 4 days I've been sorting through these files, and it seems like I'm no closer to the end than when I started. Did the government purposefully hire the most unimaginative people they could find? It'd help if I had any sense of time. There's no damn windows in this room. Just me, my desk, and this mountain of paperwork. Surely there's got to be one interesting file in all of this mess. Okay. Eeny, meeny, miny, mo. The following document contains the final journal entry of Captain T.H. Whitaker, harbourmaster of Ipswich, Massachusetts, and the events which took place there in the autumn of 1923.
September 17th, 1923. I write what may well be the last entry in this journal. 63 years it's been since I was brought into the world. I'm an Ipswich man, plain and simple. I've seen my fair share of hardship. Life around here is tough, but Ipswich folk are made of hardier stuff than most. We make do with what we have, and for the most part are a contented folk. That all seems so trivial now. I feel the need to write an account of what has happened thus far. Perhaps it is a vain attempt to record my life for posterity, if there are any souls left to read it. Whatever the reason, I have taken some time to amass as much knowledge of the past month as I can, and will now lay out all that I know in full. Like all stories linked to the sea, the first we in Ipswich heard of the trouble was from an acclaimed eyewitness. It was the evening of August 15th, and I had taken a mind to stretching my legs and taking in the latest news and outlandish tales in the Gannet's Gullet, a local favorite amongst fishermen and captains. The fact that I had reams of stock and import documents waiting to be written had only furthered this longing. The Gannet's Gullet always attracts a colorful crowd. But as I entered that night, I knew I had stepped into a different atmosphere entirely. Normally, a din of raucous laughter and swearing that would make a bishop faint greeted a man upon entering. This night, I was met with silence. The cause of the hush, I soon found out, was a Mr. Heinrich Kruger. He had been a dock worker in the town of Salisbury for the past 5 years, having come to America from his native Munich. Kruger had been sat in a corner, wrapped in oilskins, clutching a glass of whiskey for dear life. Looking back, the man's eyes still haunt me. I had only seen eyes like his once before, when Willie Carson came back from the Civil War when I was a boy. A crowd of about 20 men huddled around Kruger, hooked on every word which escaped from rattling teeth. He had spoken of taking in the night's catch with the other workers sometime after 1 o'clock in the morning, when an unknown ship approached the harbor. Dark and rotten it was, seaweed all over, and the figurehead a leering skull. At first, I'd assumed this to be another yarn about a haunted ship, seen one moment and gone the next. Kruger's next words will stay with me to my dying day. We all stopped working to watch the ship dock, and then it blew its foghorn. The sound, I feel it still in my head, and the men, they writhed on the floor like beasts. They changed and became beasts, clawing and biting and ripping at each other. I ran from that place. I am still running. I must go further south. Why was I left alive? Why must I live with those pictures in my head for all of time? The bodies, children and women too, all eaten, beast and men and beasts. At that point, Kruger lapsed into a series of inane babble, some of it in English and some in his native German. He was taken to Danvers Lunatic Asylum the next morning. That may well have been the end of the story, the rantings of a deranged docker dredged up over the years to frighten greenhorns, had it not been for the front page of the local papers that day. The headline story told of a massacre at Salisbury. Men, women, and children butchered in their sleep. Evidence of some of the remains having been consumed, and the bite marks on the bodies not matching those of wolves, cougars, or bears. Most worrying of all were reports of the remaining townsfolk collectively having gone insane, attacking police officers and medics if any came too close, fighting over the remains and howling like maddened beasts. Roughly a week after Kruger sat in the Gannet's Gullet and told his tale, Abraham Barnes, an Ipswich captain, returned from the fishing grounds off Newburyport, the next fishing town south of Salisbury. He had come in from the storm, which had battered Ipswich for 3 days, soaked to the skin and shaking. What I had first taken for a chill turned out to be fright. Barnes had told us he was sailing back to Ipswich shortly after midnight, his hold full of fish. He took a chance look at the nearby Newburyport. He had described what had looked like a U.S. warship, much like the kind used in the Great War. This was no ship of the living, just like that Kruger fella said, all dark and slimy-like. And true's his word, there at the bow, a great skull. It was like no ship I ever saw. Myself and some of the other captains then asked had he heard the foghorn that Kruger had mentioned. Barnes' face went dark at the mention of it. I did all right, and so did my boys. Took to ripping each other asunder, they did. Threw themselves overboard and swam for shore. I had to shoot one of them what came into the wheelhouse. I took that lad on not 5 summers ago. They're all gone. Eaten or drowned. Newsburyport much the same. I could hear the screams turning to howls on the wind. When asked by one of the captains to describe the sound of the foghorn he had heard, Barnes' face blanched. The man wept like an infant, shaking uncontrollably. To see such a powerful man brought so low, I dread to think of what sound could have brought on such a change. We waited for news of the attack on Newsburyport in the Ipswich Crier the following morning. But to our shock, there had been nothing. 2 towns attacked in as many weeks, cannibalism, mass hysteria, and murder. Why had the second attack not been reported? Some of the captains, myself included, figured the government was trying to suppress news of the attacks until they knew more about why such terrible things had happened. 6 days after Barnes' account of the fall of Newsburyport, the news we had dreaded finally reached us. Rowley, the next fishing town south of Newsburyport, was on fire. Travelers on the road had claimed that the whole harbor had been set ablaze, and that the dockers would be seen throwing townspeople into the blaze. This grim account was not what worried us. The thought that gnawed at every Ipswich man, woman, and child was that Rowley was only 3 miles north of our town. The papers had reported that a riot had broken out in Rowley, and that President Hoover himself had sent the National Guard in to quell the violence. That was more than 2 weeks ago. Rowley has remained silent since. I sit now at my desk, a desk from which I have watched Ipswich for 17 years. I have seen many come and go. I've seen the worried faces of Ipswich men as they went to Europe to fight in the Great War. I have seen the faces of mothers and children resigned to the possibility that they may never see their menfolk again. That worry pales in comparison to the dread which grips Ipswich now. Back then, the enemy was in Europe, belligerent empires to be smacked back into line or destroyed entirely. Now, the enemy is different, for we are our own enemy. With each night that passes, we all await the noise which we know is coming. The foghorn. The previous attacks were closely spaced within days of each other. Not so with Ipswich. It is the inexorable waiting which tugs at my soul, and doubtless every soul in the town. To know one is to die, yet being able to do nothing about it, is a fate I hope, dear reader, you never have to bear. You may ask, why do we not leave? Some have already done so, those who earn a living off the land as opposed to the sea. For those of us whom the sea means the difference between feast or famine, Ipswich is our home, the only home we have. Generations of families tied to the sea by oaths sworn in salt water. It runs in our veins. To ask us to leave is like asking a mackerel to live in the desert. So no, we do not leave, but stay knowing that when our blood runs in rivers, as it must do, it will run into the sea like all rivers, and we will be joined with our mother once more. I have barricaded myself into my office. I have known many of these people all of my life, and I will not be the cause of their death, or they mine. I would sooner tear my own flesh asunder than harm a head on any other. I have held this office for almost 2 decades, looking over the town, ensuring its safety. I will not take part in its destruction, whether I be a man or a beast. The rain now has finally stopped, at least. Until now, it has been pounding the windows for countless hours. I can hear some of the townspeople praying. It breaks my heart to see such hardy folk laid low, but I do not blame them for trusting in God to deliver us from this hell. The time is 20 past 1 in the morning on Friday, September 17th. I expect another long, labored night of sleepless waiting for a sound that likely will not.
Here lies the last journal entry of T.H. Whitaker. Eyewitness accounts from one of the survivors of the massacre at Ipswich have told us that the town folks began killing one another shortly after 1:30. Evidence of cannibalism of men, women, and children. Both survivors claim to have seen no ship matching the description given in Whitaker's journal. Investigations are ongoing. Dwight F. Davis, Secretary of War.